Welcome to Art Machines 2 conference at the School of Creative Media at the University of Hong Kong. My name is Olli Tapio Leino. I'm an associate professor here at School of Creative Media, and it's my great pleasure to chair this session number 11, entitled Digital Game Formations. We have 3 presentations in this session. And before we start, I have an announcement to make that this session is being recorded and it will be made available to registered Art Machines 2 attendees until 15th of September 2021 at the conference website. It will not be accessible to the public. For online participants, if you do not wish to be recorded, please exit the session or turn off your microphone and camera. Okay, that off the table. Let me introduce the first speaker of this session, who is Yiou Morgan, who will present the paper entitled Becoming Animal in Everything, Posthuman Affect in Computer Gameplay. Without further ado, Morgan, please take it away.
Hi everyone, my name is Yiou. I'm a PhD candidate at the School of Creative Media, City University of Hong Kong. Today I'm going to present my paper, Becoming Animal in Everything, Posthuman Affect in Computer Gameplay. This paper examines the posthuman affect in computer gameplay by drawing on Deleuze and Guattari's idea of becoming animal. It does so by looking specifically at Everything, an art game developed by artist David O'Reilly, which lets the player transform into different species and objects in the universe. Foregrounding the posthuman affect in becoming animal, this paper provides an example of how to undo anthropocentrism and engage the posthuman subjectivity in digital. So what is becoming animal? In the A Thousand Plateaus, Deleuze and Guattari point out that a becoming is not a correspondence between relations, but neither is it a resemblance, an imitation, or as a limit and identification. In other words, becoming animal is not to imitate an animal or to identify the characteristics of an animal. It should be understood in relation to another key concept of Deleuze and Guattari, the concept of affect. Affect is defined by them not as a personal feeling, nor is it a characteristic. It is the effectuation of a power of the pack that throws itself into the upheaval and makes it real. Becoming animal for Deleuze and Guattari is the capacity to affect and be affected, to enter a zone of proximity or mode of relation with the animal. Such becoming animal can be seen in the novel Moby Dick, in which capital Ahab has a tendency to become whale. Art historian Steve Baker looks at the notion of becoming animal in the context of contemporary art, examining the increasing use of animal imagery in contemporary art making, for example, in Boyce's use of coyote in his performance art, and its shift away from being remote ciphers for human meanings to being instances of artist and animal coming together as living beings caught up in each other's affairs. In this sense, becoming animal is not merely a rhetoric or metaphor, but a practice or device entrenched in the process of art making. Game scholars have also been engaging with Deleuzean concepts such as becoming an affect for quite some time. Colin Kremen, for example, adopts the concept of becoming animal to delineate a theory of the relationship between player and avatar. By playing Mario, the player enters an assemblage with not only the image of Mario on the screen, but also the affects of Mario, manifested in a series of in-game actions such as jumping, spinning, stomping, etc. So for Kremen, Deleuzean concepts can be put into operation in a more literal way, becoming Mario in this case, not in other words by way of analogy or metaphor. In a similar vein, Cornel Duplessis takes up a Deleuze-Guattari lens to examine the video game Flower, highlighting the affects enabled in the game aesthetics and the transformative experiences, in this instance becoming Flower, offered by the game. He also postulates the Deleuze-Guattari framework as a counter-strategy to the representational models of video games on the one hand and the essence-based or rule-based models on the other. So this paper will continue the theoretical engagement with Deleuze and Guattari's concepts in game studies and look specifically at the concept of becoming animal with regard to the posthuman ethics embedded and embodied in digital play. The term posthumanism can be traced back to either the pronouncement of the death of man at the end of Foucault's The Order of Things or the emergence of cybernetics and system theory. Deeply rooted in the tradition of post-structuralism and anti-humanism, posthumanism foregrounds a return to bodies, technique, machines, and other materialities that were obscured by the literary and textualist proclivities of the humanist tradition, quote from Posthuman. In this spirit, Deleuze and Guattari's idea of becoming animal can be seen as an instance of posthuman affect, which calls for the opening up of oneself to the sensation of animal affect. So by associating the concept of becoming animal with the ethics of posthuman, this paper seeks to open up the discussion of affect in game studies in an attempt to counteract the humanist and textualist tradition of approaching digital games. In line with the affective turn in critical theory and cultural criticism, here I will briefly review several strands of research into affect in game studies. Yujie, for example, follows Brian Masumi to conceptualize affect as the intensity of precognitive bodily response and posits affect in computer games as a way of describing the feel or intensity of a game. Such affect can be best manifested in video games that privilege intensity over content, such as Sega's musical game, Res. Another example is Aubrey Annabelle's work Playing with Feelings. In this book, Annabelle takes up American psychologist Selvin Tompkins' theory of the affect as a counterpoint to the Deleuzian versions of the affect theory. According to the author, the Deleuzian versions, for example Masumi's, understand affect as what gets body out of the grids of signification, whereas Tompkins' cybernetically influenced theory recognizes the co-assembly of affect and cognition, which in a sense puts affect back into the signifying structure. Then in the book Video Games and the Mind, Essays on Cognition, Affect, and Emotion, Bernard Perrin and Felix Schroeder situate both affect and emotion in the cognitive paradigm to study video games. Drawing on neuroscience and the philosophy of mind, the authors highlight the multi-dimensional model of cognition, affect, and emotion, in which cognition focuses on players' mental processes, whereas affect addresses players' lower-order sensations and emotion speaks to players' basic emotional responses. These examples demonstrate different ways of understanding affect in computer gameplay. Some locate affect in the player's bodily projection, others in the realm of signification or cognition. This difference for some affect theories marks the key distinction between affect and emotion, the two of which follow different logics and pertain to different orders. For Masumi and his followers, affect is an autonomic bodily precognitive intensity that is independent of signification, whereas emotion belongs to the subjective signifying acts rooted in the humanist textualist tradition. So, in this sense, the shift from emotion to affect can also be seen as a passage of the human to the posthuman, in the sense that the posthuman can be plotted as a necessarily affective experience of the demise of the strictly codified subjective feelings that are associated with traditional notions of human subjectivity, as cited in Vormanen. By foregrounding this distinction between emotion and affect, this paper continues to take up the Deleuzian versions of the affective theory, emphasizing the posthuman ethics embedded in the account of affect. And in the next section, I will closely examine such posthuman affect in the gameplay of everything. By analyzing the mechanism of this game, unfolding the experience of playing it, and comparing it with the ways in which the animal imagery is used in other games, this paper seeks to respond to the following questions. What does it mean to become animal in the case of computer games? What kinds of posthuman affect does becoming animal in computer gameplay open up to? And how to understand such posthuman affect in relation to the materiality of computer game artifact? As a typical art game, everything has been shown in many exhibitions, and that's also the case when I first encountered this game. It was at the Shenzhen New Media Art Festival in 2019. Together with many other artworks, everything was grouped under the sub-theme of posthumanism, machine and movement, speed and space. So installed in a dark and semi-enclosed space as shown here, the game was connected to a large projection screen, and opposite the screen was a sofa with a wireless controller for visitors to use. It was a very quiet day in the museum, so I had plenty of time experiencing the game. I did not restart the game, but continued the process of the previous player, starting as a gray wolf walking on the frozen lakes, as you can see on the right side. The wolf walked in a very strange way, not by alternating movement of its four legs, but by rolling 90 degrees each time I pushed the thumbstick. The wolf can also join other wolves to form a pack. And since there was no clear goal to fulfill, what I did at that time was simply becoming a wolf, running, singing, and dancing around on the frozen lakes. After the first encounter with this game in the exhibition, I started to play it regularly on PC at home. It has soon become a tranquil and enlightening experience. The ways in which the animals can ascend and descend to other species and objects nearby not only manifest the inherent connectivity between the things in the world and the constant emergence and contingence of the cosmos, but also demonstrate the limitations of our knowledge and our human-centric perspective of looking at the world. Just as the game voiceover reminds us, every being perceives the world as if it is at the center of the world, just as we humans do. One example is once I descended from a goat to a cricket. The whole game world became blurry. My sight could only cover a few centimeters in front of me, and everything else in the distance became blurred. So while this might not be a scientific illustration of insect vision, it does provide us with a direct sensation of how insects see the world, prompting us to reconsider other modes of seeing and perceiving. The game's self-play function on the one hand, saves me from the pressure and tension of paying too much attention to the game, but on the other hand, problematize the subjectivity of me as the player. If I stop controlling the game for a few seconds, it will enter the self-play mode in which the animals or objects on the screen will move around and descend or ascend into other things automatically. So in this respect, my effort seems trivial, and I, as the player alone, do not constitute the subject here. This further questions the autonomous and self-contained existence of the player, prompting us to rethink the notion of subject in the lens of posthumanism. Just as Bradotti suggests, a posthuman subject is a matter of forces, relations, of capacities, of inclination. A subject is not a bound entity, it's a relational, transversal threshold of interconnection. In this case, the subject is no longer the individual player sitting in front of the game screen, but seems to be a relational network formed by the player's body, the computer, the screen, different animals, species, and objects in the game world, and the practice of playing. A dance of agency between human and non-human. Although this cartoonish style of the game graphics makes it far from a realistic experience of becoming animal, the game has incited an affect about animal that is not very common in other games. For in everything, the animals are not monsters or bosses that need to be fight against. For example, the giant rat in Dark Souls, nor are they resources that can be used to level up the game. For example, the second picture here, the Charizard, the dragon dinosaur in Pokemon Go. And they are also not useful tools that serve multiple purposes for the human characters. For example, the horses in The Legend of Zelda series, or simply anthropomorphic non-player characters accompanying human characters. For example, the bear villagers in Animal Crossing series. The animals in everything do not serve any specific purpose or have a particular function. In other words, they have in some sense subverted or disrupted the logic of exploitation and oppression underpinning capitalism. And because of this lack of functionality and purposefulness, the animals in everything do not provoke those codified emotional dispositions as the animal mentioned in the previous examples do. So what they instigate are bodily feelings that are less easily captured, defined, and also understood or re-territorialized onto the subject. By entering modes of relations with the animals and other non-human objects in the game world, the player can open up to a heterogeneous affective dynamic that bypass the readily identifiable emotional scenarios. Let me draw my conclusion here. This paper has looked at the posthuman affect embodied and embedded in the gameplay of becoming animal. In everything. In this game, the animals are not anthropomorphized as another version of human beings. By becoming animal and looking at the world from their eyes, we can shake off some of the human-centric perspectives of seeing and perceiving the world. The world is not centered around humans. Any species and object can be the center of their own perception. This problematizes the difference between center and margin, questioning how the difference gets made and who gets to decide the center-margin disposition. Also, the animal here should be viewed as not only the figurative signifier the player is directly engaging with on the screen, but also the categorical indicator of the non-human and post-human dimension that categorizes digital play. By playing this game, the player enters into a field of relations or a cybernetic circuit with the game artifact, the computer, the screen, the controller, and the representations of animals and other objects on the screen. In this respect, I argue that the player's body can no longer be seen as an autonomous entity sitting in front of the computer, exercising control and command, but rather, as Blackman brilliantly summarizes, our bodies always extend and connect to other bodies, human and non-human, to practices, techniques, technologies, and objects which produce different kinds of bodies, and arguably different ways of enacting what it means to be human and non-human. By looking at computer games and play in this theoretical lineage from Deleuze and Guattari's idea of becoming animal, the turn to affect, and also the posthuman condition, this paper can be seen as an example of how to undo anthropomorphism and anthropocentrism in digital play. On the other hand, this discussion of posthuman affect in computer game play also provides a vivid context for us to better understand the intricacy between affect, emotion, intensity, and signification, adding further complexity to Deleuze and Guattari's original idea of becoming animal. And here are the references. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. And now I would like to remind the online audience that there is now 1 minute for you to type in questions in the chat. And the audience in the room, please keep your questions in mind. I will ask you for questions at the end of this panel. And while you type in your questions, I shall take this opportunity to introduce our next speakers, who are Yiou Wang and Yujie Wang, who will be presenting a paper entitled The Moving Maze, Systems and Units. And without further ado, may I invite Yiou and Yujie to present. Thank you.
presentation is an introduction to our independent game, The Moving Maze. My name is Wang, and I'm an architect, game designer, and researcher from Harvard University Graduate School of Design.
I'm Yujie, and I'm an interaction designer and creative technologist from MIT.
We're glad to present our art project, The Moving Maze. Our presentation is organized into 4 sequential parts. First, we're going to put the maze in the historical context, which gives us the initial idea. The maze descends from the labyrinth. The primary distinction is that a maze is multi-cursal, having multiple paths. Architecture underwent profound transformations with the emergence of the maze, the first play space, which witnessed the first time that architecture introduced choice and indeterminacy. Away from the symbolic experience of a labyrinth, the maze offers an immersive recreational experience with walls. The 3-dimensionality changes the maze from a pattern to an architecture, gradually evolving into a type of what Johann Huizinga terms playground, which denotes spaces that host ludic practices. The most winding way to go from one place to another, the multi-cursal maze offers a rich risk-reward structure, triggering the psychological state of problem-solving. In the most basic and traditional mode to game a maze, the player plays against time toward the goal of arriving at a destination. As Johann Huizinga posits, play precedes culture. The gamer identity is both historic, as a child instinctively exhibits a tendency to play, and futuristic, as in an advanced society, liberated individuals evolve into gamers. The historic maze evolves in many forms of contemporary adaptations as the gamer identity of people persists. The maze belongs to the 4th category of games theorized by Roger Caillois, the Illings, which is based on thrill-seeking and risk-taking navigation in disorientation. In modern game classification, the game maps onto the puzzle game genre, which activates problem-solving skills based on logic and spatial cognition. The maze carries over to many different mediums. Board games adapt the traditional maze with partial animation of the walls, tessellation, and modularization, particular to the toy medium. In video games, the nice art, the maze is liberated from natural rules of architecture such as geometry and gravity. The maze can be deconstructed, modularized, suspended in air, and the orientation of gravity can change. Modern installations by architects and artists are interested in exploring alternative materiality and the vertical dimension, which alter the spatial cognition and perceptual modalities of the players inside. In the soft maze and glass maze examples, the difference lies not only in the choice of the alternative material, but in that the material drives the change in the metaphorical connotations and the way human interacts with the structure. In architectural drawings, labyrinthine representational narratives depict the complex urban system with pictorial profusion characterized by viewpoint multiplicities and temporal multiplicities. The next section is spatializing the maze, in which we discuss the maze and geometry in which our game is structured. We want to create a maze that can move, and the ideal medium to host that maze is a video game, since architectural parts can be animated. The basic geometry of the maze is a sprawling horizontal structure of orthogonal walls, which is the geometry of the classic hedge maze. We appreciate the rationality by the ruled orthogonal geometry as a space of possibility. The complexity of the spatial possibilities arise from, not in spite of, the geometric simplicity. The moving maze is designed using constructive logic and the system unit method. On the micro level, the maze is deconstructed to the non-subdivisible most elementary unit of a double L. The maze contains a multitude of this single unit rotated in different orientations. On the meso level, the maze is semiotic. The units cluster together through various combinations and permutations, forming architectural components that have certain conventional meanings: the passage, the corner, the junction, and the dead end. An experimentation of the philosophy that a complex system arises from the simplest elements, the maze on the macro scale is generated and continuously generating space of possibilities from the propagation and rotation of units across a field. Painstaking considerations have been exhausted in the visual design of the moving maze, with the essential priorities of making it comprehensively lucid and no less beautiful.
The game's primary interface has chosen a still, aerial axonometric representation of the maze structure, which can maximize objectivity and even-handedness in the field of vision. Since the perspective view demands inconsistent measures of length and width, contingent on the point of view, the removal of moving perspective avoids assumption of any particular point of view, pushing the game genre spectrum more toward the puzzle and less the adventure end. The moving maze changed its layout interactively, already forfeiting the player's temporal omniscience, therefore allowing the player spatial omniscience.
The visualization of the maze is influenced by Chinese long-scroll painting, 1,000 Li of Rivers and Mountains, in the 12th century. The long scroll depicts mountains on water in a dreamlike ethereal ambience. Although the moving maze centers around an area presumably smaller in scale, the game shares the aerial view and desired ambience of the literati romanticism and aims to convey the sentiment and the elegance of 1,000 Li by simplistic abstraction and sensitive color selection. Now that the game is spatialized and staged, it is time to hit ready, set, go. Games are anchored on rules. Rules that demarcate the play activity, rules that determine a reward distribution, rules that give the game a structure and added values. We want to design a game that is able to operate itself once rules are established. First of all, the moving maze adopts the conventional rules of mazes. You can move in the direction of open spaces, and you get impeded by the wall, and your goal is to go from the start location to the destination. It references the player's previous experience. The novel rule that separates this game from the rest of maze games is based on alternative feedback mechanics. After every move the player takes, the maze reconfigures through partial rotation in response to the player's movement, with implicit rules in a way that encourages the player to identify patterns of the system. Space evokes and constructs a narrative while navigating in them, known as environmental storytelling. The maze offers indexical narrative elements that provide spatial comprehension for the player who must piece the narrative together by navigating the space. Instead of explicit instructions that tell the player how to move forward, the game opts for having the player discover the pattern through indices left by the wall's movement, and have the player learn to navigate the moving maze that reconfigures with the difficulty progression from easy to hard.
In the game, there are two agents, the player agent and the environment agent, which is the maze. On the superficial level, the player aims to navigate out of the maze, while the maze reconfigures to obstruct the player from finding the solution path. The oppositional goals create a zero-sum situation of the player playing against the maze, but unlike AlphaGo that is built to win. The ultimate goal of the moving maze as a video game is to immerse human player in an engaging, rich game experience rather than defeat the human player. The environment agent, representing the maze, will simultaneously obstruct the human player and mitigate this action to match the level of the player to enable them a successful exit most of the time, but remain challenging to them with the probability to let them fail. Therefore, the moving maze is not just a human-machine zero-sum game, but also a non-zero-sum game, whose game mechanics is explicitly adversarial but implicitly cooperative. To program the maze that adapts to the level of the player, a set of game state parameters determine the difficulty for a player to get out of the moving maze, such as the number of the solution path, the number of turns, and other determinants of the difficulty at a given state. Furthermore, player-dependent parameters also factor into the quantification of the game to evaluate the player experience. Concept of the maze as a gameable architecture arises from its spatial potential to engender modes of play, measured on player engagement, which involves the game mechanics and balance player agency and environment agency. Game balance is the fine-tuning of the game to be engaging, moderately challenging, and often manageable with incremental rise in difficulty. Game balancing is often a time-consuming process, and new learning algorithms have recently been used to make this process more efficient. With reinforcement learning, agents learn through iterative experience with the objective to maximize total reward. In our initial moving maze game prototype, we propose to introduce adversarial reinforcement learning in this multi-agent environment to improve competitive game mechanics. In this case, to achieve greater game balance is to achieve smoother difficulty index fluctuation.
Thank you for listening. The moving maze is playable here at Itch, and our team is working on developing the game onto the next stage. So stay tuned.
Thank you. Now I remind the online audience that you have 1 minute to pose questions in the chat. I have already posted my own questions in my Google Keep notes here, but audience, please type in your questions in the chat. And while you type in your questions, I shall introduce our next speaker, who is Qian, who is going to present a paper called Pretty and Random: Anime-style meta-narratives in the age of social games. And I understand that for a change, Jason is presenting live. So may I now invite Jason to come forth and share your screen, please.
Yes.
Take it away.
Yes. Yeah. So can you see my slides now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I'm sorry for making my presentation into a
recording stopped.
Into a less formal and more casual talk, because something happened in my life. My mother was diagnosed with cancer, and so I have to be the main caretaker for her, because at this moment the hospital does not allow outside care workers to. During this pandemic, but it's also thanks to the pandemic that I can connect to this conference live online virtually. So it's like the pandemic has synchronized all of us, or all of us are forced to be synchronized. With our disparate personal situations. It's sort of game-like for me. Okay, so my interest of research is about the possible connection between the social games with the gacha system to what I call the multi-characterism in the recent anime-ish narrative production. So actually, I hesitate on whether to use multi-characterism or polycharacterism to denote to this phenomenon, because by multi-characterism I mean many characters. It's not like one or like a few characters in one narrative, but it's like characters that are many enough to compose their own sociology. And we can explain that system with sociology and then form a rich community. So the best example is the Toho project. I mean, on the right side of the picture, you see a lot of characters within that story world, within that universe. But what is more important is that, now if we recount the theories of possible worlds narratology, and we know in possible worlds narratology, the status of characters has always been debated. But one of the main traits of characters within a narrative texts, as Ethan says, is the incompleteness of characters, because a text cannot simply portray every aspect of a character, like how he or she lives, how she eat and drink every day, such things. So that kind of a blank is left to the audience to imagine. And there are a lot of schemata of such imagination. That's the hot zone of debating among those narratologists. But for projects like the Toho project, it actually encourages a lot of fans to make their own doujin or secondary creations, so that the incompleteness of characters can be filled not only with imagination but also with additional secondary creative texts. So that also makes this kind of story world further from the kind of hierarchy between characters. Like in traditional narratives, there are main character, there are supportive character, and there are cameo characters. But with secondary creations, you can make a cameo character the protagonist of your text. So that's the multi-characterism that I'm talking about. So I've been interested in that kind of multi-characterists, or we say all-star story worlds since my PhD in the SCM. So at that moment, what I was cared about the most is what I call the creative relay, or the n-ary creation. N-ary, by n-ary I mean primary, secondary, tertiary n-ary creation on a video sharing community called Nico Doga. And there are a lot of now we call that 鬼畜视频, Kichiku videos on those sites. And those are the perfect example of how they take live action characters and elements into a kind of anime-ish multi-characterist narrative or meta-narrative. So that was the first wave. But it is really interesting that after the year of 2016, somewhere around that, the creative relay on Nico Doga has, decreased, plummeted. So, and also the user base of Nico Doga was also stagnant around that time. So at this moment, the text where you can find the most characters are no longer those doujin, are no longer those original doujins, but the works of social games, the titles of social games, and the games that possess the most the kind of multi-characterist traits are the games with a gacha system. So what is a gacha system? Gacha, actually, the etymology comes from someone said it's actually a Japanese style abbreviation of the got you, gotcha, as you can also see this phrase in Pokemon Go, although Pokemon Go is a AR game. And someone said the words may come from the sound when you play a gacha machine, like the picture on the left. Yeah, it's a capsule lucky drawing machine. You can find a lot in Japan, in Akihabara. So in a lot of recent social game titles, especially the Japanese styles, Matsuhara says the gacha system is unique. It's kind of a distinctive trait of the Japanese social game marketing system, because it serves both as a system of characterization, of introducing characters, and also a system of monetization. So let's take a look at an actual example of a social game with a gacha system. Yeah, we'll do so. So my plan is to get to a game which we can actually perform a gacha. Okay, so this is the game I'm going to show you. This game is called Umamusume Pretty Derby. It's translated as Horse Girl Pretty Derby. So this game features the anthropomorphization of race horses to girls. That kind of anime-ish approach. And then in this game, what I would like to make you focus are these features. Firstly, on the bottom screen, on the top screen, on the top screen, you can put your favorite characters. On the top screen, so that her gaze is right at the players. So this is my favorite character, Goat Ship. Yeah, my wife. And then in the story section, actually, you see two sections. That features the story of the game. And one section is called the main story, and the other section is called Umamusume story. That means the encounters of each horse girl in this game. It's about a particular horse girl and you, that kind of rendezvous story. Okay, so and then we get to the lucky drawing system, the gacha system. It's like each time you invest a certain amount of items in this game that you get from dungeons, from quests, from daily logins, and then you can invest that into a lucky drawing pool, and then certain amount of characters will come out, and some of them may be rare, some of them may be your favorite. So for me, and there are also the kind of, in Chinese we say 玄学, in English we can call it mysticism or occult to follow. There are certain ways to perform this kind of lucky drawing that can make you get the characters you like. There are that kind of myths flows everywhere online, and I've checked beforehand, and this is the right time to gacha. So let's perform a gacha right now, and you can see there are the kind of animation design that's for all these visual effects and visual cues that excites your encounters with the character. Okay. I don't know the outcome. Let's hope the outcome is good. Okay, so, good. I got a rare character. Although she is not the character that I want. It's good. Thanks for the conference for me to encounter this character. Okay, let's go on with our introduction. So this is the gacha system, and this gacha system is sometimes blamed for being too close to gambling systems, and that kind. And some of the scholars says the gacha system actually uses the weakness of our psychology, of our minds, and then it actually, I mean, as you can see, it actually invokes our gambling mentality. So this is not a good system of games. But for me, actually, I look at the gacha system. I regard gacha system as a new way to introduce the player's involvement to characters and also to the relationships of the characters. And this is a system that's worth investigating. So, and there's also something I would like to talk beforehand, before we explore the phenomenon, is that such kind of multi-characterism is more or less like cyber-driven, technical driven. So Azuma calls that kind of system the recent game, the recent anime-ish meta narrative as game style realist. When he actually did not, explain what is game style in very good detail, but there is something that we can follow here. He said the characters, they are kind of introduced into the anime narratives. For example, in one text, and then in another text, he's doing something totally different. For a very radical example, one character lives in one text and then dies in the next. So how can we understand such kind of a difference if they are in the same story world? So Azimuth says actually in such kind of a narrative, there is a layer of what he called meta monogatari, that means meta fiction. There is a layer of rules there. That means that actually how the character lives and dies, and how characters, what I call symbiosis. The characters live together. They rely on each other. It's because the characters are. It's because there is a overarching rule. Yeah.
You have 5 minutes left.
Oh, okay. So so this is the system of Azuma. So the Azuma's association of recent anime narrative to games has interested me to thinking about the gacha games, because as a multi-characterist system, these games they are more closer, to the game mechanism. So I think, and it is more like technologically supported and driven. You see that kind of system. So there is something, about the mechanism of game that we should talk about in these games. And what actually especially interested me is the concept of time. And we know that in conventional game theories, they said the one thing that's very interesting about the game, about the concept of time in games, is that, as Yiou says, in a game is a state machine, and then it is a state machine when the states actually are static. The game time kind of freezes, and at this moment, the nonlinear stories can be grafted into the main story and something like that. So in recent games, the this kind of pauses, and the safe loads are very important because they can freeze the game time, the event time for a while, and for you to for the grafted stories to come in. But recently, online games, has emerged in our gaming culture, and there are specifically two kinds of online games. One is the MMORPG kind, and the other is the social network game SNG kind. And the games with the gacha system are mostly SNG kind. For the MMORPG, the time is mostly frozen. We can say between patches.
Sorry, Jason, 2 minutes
between
left.
versions. So the game contents, they are mostly communicative. So it's not related to time for most of the playing experience. But for the SNG game, especially with the lucky draw system, and you can see such kind of pauses can be deployed to contents or even the ontology of the game. So as I have said,
almost out of time, I'm afraid.
Almost out of time. Okay, so I'll just guide you through the PowerPoints. Okay, so there is the mysticism, the 玄学, the occult, about how you can make a better lucky draw, and then there are even a religious practices, mystic practices to accommodate that, and I have some theories for that. Yeah, and my prospect is that such mysticism at the metafictional layer of gacha games that goes along with the fan activities that embrace such kind of mysticism as a passion for characters. And then at the design layer for these games, there is an ambivalent attitude. They kind of emphasize the visual effect for such kind of mysticism, but it is a computer pseudo-random generator that can disenchant such kind of randomness. So this is a very interesting balance. Okay, and so such kind of balance and such kind of a mysticism, such kind of re-enchantment will go on as a kind of catalyst for the multi-characterism, for the for that may modify or change the prospect of the anime-ish narrative, because such kind of gacha social game has become dominant these years in the consumption market of video games, at least in East Asia.
And your time is up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to Jason, and thank you to all the other presenters also in this panel. Now we are opening up the discussion for Q&A, and as usual, at this point we might just leave the chat open for the rest of the session in case there are questions. Let's go in the order of presentations. I had prepared a question for Morgan, and then I find that Peter Nelson in the chat was asking exactly the kind of question I was going to ask. So I'll read Peter's question, but I will add what I would have added to that question. Peter was asking, if something looks like an animal on the screen, how do we know it is an animal? And Peter further clarifies, Given that we only interact with images of animals in this case, are we becoming pixels rather than becoming animals? And now what I would have added to Peter's question is, are we not becoming David O'Reilly when we play everything?
Recording in progress.
I see. Thank you. Is the question? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I think the difference between becoming pixel and becoming animal depends on what level of abstraction we want to go or we can go. Of course, we can reduce or we can consider 2D images or 3D representations to pixels or code, but with that risks depriving our sensibility of the both material and representational dynamics of computer game and other digital media. But I think this question also provides a very important dimension for me to think about games in the lens of posthumanism, because what are we really becoming when we are interacting with these virtual avatars or animals or other objects in the game? And also responding to your question, are we becoming David O'Reilly, the game designer? I think that connects to the game's authored tradition, that the game always has a designer or author or authorship. But I think to play this game is to become and co-author of this game in a certain sense, because the way we play this game is different from how the designer or the author expect us to do.
I was thinking in this, I realized I might have cut some corners short by just inserting David O'Reilly there like that. I was reminded of Thomas Nagel. Every time I play everything, I'm reminded of Thomas Nagel, not sure how to pronounce his name, who had this famous paper I think it was in 1972, on what's it like to be a bat. And obviously we cannot answer that question since we are bound to the bodies that we have at this point. But everything tries to give us an experience of that kind, I suppose. What's it like to be an insect? And you mentioned that if you become an insect, you have a sort of insect vision in the game.
Yes.
But what is that if not David O'Reilly's notion of what it means to become an insect? That's why I was sort of adding that David O'Reilly there, that we are becoming insect according to David O'Reilly. Question mark.
Yes. I think I partly agree to your observation that we are becoming David O'Reilly in the sense that we are entering or we are following his perspective of perceiving this world or perceiving different animals. But in a sense, I think the designer tries to make his representation of these animals scientific. For example, he added a lot of information like encyclopedia in the game. So you can have a section where you can look up what kind of animals you have become, and there is a like Wikipedia definition of these animals. So I think the designer is trying to objectify his own design.
It almost sounds like a Helmholtzian sort of transcendentalism based on the sensory organs, that if we know enough of the biology of the insects, then supposedly we understand how they see the world. Really interesting presentation. Let us move on a bit. I wonder if there are any questions for Yiou and Yujie in the audience. I do have a question too. There is a question.
Can I have a question? Can I ask a question?
There was someone, I believe, in the room first, actually.
Okay.
Let us pass on the mic. This is exciting. Hybrid conference. You might want to introduce yourself in the beginning.
Oh, Mic working? On right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm Utkarsh and I'm a student at Yiou. I'm a computer science major. So what question I had was, I saw your demo of the game, and the question that came to my mind was, when the maze was shifting or changing the walls, the player comes to a standstill. So is it intentional, or can the player just sneak or slip through the walls when they're shifting?
Thank you for your question. Can you hear me all right? Since I'm
Yes,
using
we can.
a microphone. Okay, great. So this is our intention because in our game, it's almost like a test. So the environment, the player against each other in a competitive mode. So the
Your
player,
audio is not exactly very clear. Maybe you could speak closer to the mic, perhaps.
okay. So the player moves one step, and then the environment moves. So it's they take turns.
So you cannot sneak through the walls when they're changing.
No, that will be an affordance, which is what the game is not designed for. The game is a system of unnecessary obstacles. To participate in the game, you kind of accept to be a voluntary participant. You accept the unnecessary obstacles. For example, if you are navigating in a hatch maze uh, in a in an English garden, the easiest way actually is that you helicopter and go into the air and then immediately figure out the way out to the exit. But people don't do that, not because they cannot do that, but because they're willing to participate in such a game in which the rules are defined by, there are two sets of rules. The first is the natural rules, which is like you cannot run through a wall. There's a physical wall there. And another set of rules is conventional rules. So conventional rules usually include the conventional sense of or definition of a spatial element, such as a door, a passage. So this is what a game is for. So it's for getting there the fastest ways, for voluntarily participating in a mechanism that gets you to the destination in the most inefficient way.
Okay. I have another question. So my second question is about your game mechanics. If the walls are changing and it creates an unnecessary obstacle, how do you avoid deadlocks in the game? That player just ends up in a particular test case where the player cannot reach the endpoint. So how do you avoid those deadlocks?
The way the game is designed ensures that there is very rare the case that you mentioned, the deadlocks. I don't know if by deadlocks when the person is contained in a loop and cannot move out. Is that what you mean?
Yes, basically when they're stuck in the same path, or they just cannot reach the endpoint because the wall shifted in a way.
Oh, the idea of the game is that after a few steps that the player moves, the player will discover that with his own movement, they can change the configuration. And if the person finds themselves in a stuck in a loop, the person can go in other directions, go a few walls, and then the maze would be there again. So there is virtually no deadlock in the sense that it is impossible for the person to get out.
Okay, I have one last question for you guys. Could you just go over your difficulty equation as well, which calculates the index, which was shown in the presentation?
Yeah, sure. To add on the last question, the way we design it, essentially it's possible to be trapped in a certain given step.
but it's not necessarily to be like a dead situation, because in certain configuration, the movement will trigger the reconfiguration of the walls that will lead you to the destination. But on the other way, it's possible to be trapped and you cannot get out. And in that case, that's why we think the game balance, what we define is to be engaging, moderately challenging. In this case, it's possible to fail. And on the other, in terms of your last question, so the difficulty index, we define a set of game state parameters to calculate or quantify the difficulty at each given time. It's based on several parameters, such as the number of solution paths, number of cells, which represent the length of the specific solution path, number of turns, that is the change of the direction along the path, and also the sum of freedom score, which we define as the number of possible directions to move forward in a given cell. So these are parameters we think as a good initial start to quantify the difficulty at each given state. We also have player-dependent parameters, such as number of steps for the player to complete a solution path, and rate of success. So if they fail, like how many times they take the players to successfully complete. So that measures those player-dependent parameters are measured during the playtest in order for us to understand player experience. But the game state parameters are used to determine the process. So the difficulty index we define is weighted sum of the previous game state parameters I mentioned, and in this case we just did like a 5 players play test. It's a very small number, so it's not really statistically meaningful. Like to really get a large set of play tests, we can achieve like more reasonable weight of each given parameters, because those game state parameters are also interconnected or interdependent. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm trying to keep the time here. So Jason, I was going to call for questions for you, but you also had a question for
Yiou, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so
I see. It's for Yiou.
Yeah.
Let's because I was going to go through you one by one and then start back in the beginning to make sure that everyone gets a similar time. I had a question for you, Jason, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
You mentioned the incompleteness of the characters in the beginning.
Yes.
And I was thinking, are they incomplete as game characters or are they incomplete as fictional characters? Could you sort of reflect on the difference of a game character and fictional character in this sense? Perhaps elaborate on the sort of notion of incompleteness to begin with.
Okay. So actually, the incompleteness here is is the departing point for the possible world, for the model logic, in the possible world and narratology, because they are incomplete. So what the characters will do, so the characters' behavior can be of different possibilities and can be of different obligations and something. And there might be a difference, for the characters in games and then the characters in let's say linear narratives. And especially for the, for my subject, for characters in social games, they are more described as the characters that they are long for the encounters, for the rendezvous with the player. So each game is sort of like a dating simulator. There's something about that. So the bond, the connection between the player and the character is very strong, and that kind of strong relation is further enchanted. So
right.
that's my point.
I was thinking of what would be an incomplete game character. That seems almost like an oxymoron in the sense that game characters have certain functions and they usually fulfill those functions. And there is no need for imagination to fill in the gaps. But with fictional characters, sort of less is more creates this space for illusion and for imagination.
Yes.
So sort of reconciling the fictional character and the game character.
Yes. So, but actually, if you follow the more ludological route, you can say that all the game characters, they fulfill more or less the functions. But each character, they also have a narratological side, and that's especially emphasized in this anime, in this Japanese style games. So for me, actually, I don't see it as much as a question than you probably, because in Japan, you often see such kind of, text adventure games or gal games that portrays the game character very much like a character in linear narratives. Yes.
Yes.
So I think the expressive part of the character. Because at this moment we have a lot of, a narrative phenomena that are the convergence of the game and a movie or text and linear narrative. So we're going to see more and more of this kind of convergence. I think at that moment we will see more solution to your question.
Okay, thank you. Then we go back to Morgan in this order of things, and there is a question from Yiou. I might just read it from the chat. Yiou's question for Morgan is: becoming animals usually involve multiple sensory modalities, such as smell, lateral line, and thermal vision, but the game cyberspace allows only vision and sound. How do you translate the other sensory modalities into vision and sound across the screen?
First, thank you for the question. I think it's very interesting to think about how other sensories can be translated into visual and sound, because as a player, I would think about how visual and sound can translate into other sensory modalities on me. For example, I think certain synesthesia is required for me to become animal, because what we see is only a 2D or 3D image on the screen, but what you feel is like you are becoming it, so you can feel its texture. For example, if I become a shark in the ocean, even if I cannot touch the actual shark, I can still feel the texture of its skin, and that's also manifested in its way in his swimming in the water. So I think the question here is how I am a player can translate the visual and the sound word into different sensories in my bodily feelings.
So I actually mean that as an animal, many mammals have very poor vision and they rely on smell. And once you become that animal, your sense of the external world is more heavily mediated by like smell and like vision. But how does the game designer translate other non-representable sensory modalities, non-representable as in cyberspace, because the cyberspace can only deliver and transmit vision and sound, those two modalities. It cannot translate others. And I think in medical science, there's a very long history of translating sensory modalities, thermal imaging, and usually people use an infrared camera. But an infrared camera will automatically make everything black and white, but it does recognize shapes according to temperature. Thermal imaging usually maps a visual spectrum of rainbow colors onto a gradation of temperature from low to high. Usually blue represents the low, and the red represents the highest end. So thermal imaging is a way of translating thermal perception into vision. And I think it's more like both a question and a comment. I think you would gain a lot of user potential if you think about how to translate sensory modalities of thermal vision, lateral lines, or electricity underwater, those perception, how to translate that aspect into vision and sound, which is detectable by players across the world.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting observation. But in this game, in everything, I think the designer either fails to or intend to not translate this kind of sensory modalities into this game, because I think for the scope of this game, there are thousands or 10,000s of objects or animals you can actually become. So the easiest way is to translate these animals and objects into only vision and sound. But I think your observation can provide a new perspective for game designers to do this kind of design in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Then, Jason, you had a question.
Yeah. Okay. So you have as I see the O'Reilly's game, I can see that the actions of the animals in that game, they are sort of naive. And then, as a gamer, I know that their action is probably totally built on randomness. It's also connected to my paper. And so as a gamer, I will try to rule out the possibilities. I will try to, play it as a play test, something like that. So it kind of, disenchant the whole atmosphere, the whole outlook of the game. So do you think that game is a good example for escaping that kind of disenchantment and to make us focus on the more sentimental, let's say, aspects of the game? Actually, I also have the similar feeling when I play the previous work of O'Reilly, Mountain. When I play Mountain, I try to rule out all the possibilities, and that's a more standard gaming experience than the experience of art, let's say.
Yes. I think your observation is very interesting, and also I think, as I mentioned, the game is not a realistic experience of becoming the game. So in a way, the very weird, the animals working very weird ways is a way to not only manifests the randomness you just mentioned, but also it disrupts the kind of seamless gameplay experience because it's weird. So you will think about how animals actually work in the world. You don't just take it for granted. So I think that's an important part of David O'Reilly's game and also many art games in general.
Yes.
I like, Morgan, how you give a benevolent reading of everything in this respect, where the reduction seems to have a sort of positive effect on things, that knowing that it would be impossible to simulate being an insect, then let's not even try. Let's make it as reduced and simple as possible to leave that space for the player to complete. Are there any more questions in the physical audience? I'm speaking as if there is lots of audience. There is one person there.
I just had one last comment. I would just ask for your thoughts. It's directed to Morgan. When you were talking about your ideas, this game popped up in my head. You might have heard of it. It's called Grand Theft Auto 5. It released back in 2013. So essentially, with the updates, what that game allowed was for that eventually, I mean, it's not a good way to put it, but if you go to the forest, you find some plants, and if your player consumes those plants, you tend to become an animal. So basically, what the game allows us for is to become a bird or to become a dog. And I was asking that, does that in a way portray your research or your ideas? Like, so what the game allows us in the interactive way is that you can fly as a bird and maybe land as a bird and poop on people as being a bird. So does that portray your ideas, or does that help your research some way, or do you have any thoughts on that?
I personally didn't play that game before, but from your description, I think that can be a instance of becoming animal in computer game, because I think the opposite of becoming animal is those games who use animal as either objects for human being or instrument for human or simply anthropomorphic human beings. So I think in this sense, any game that portrays animal as animals is an like installation of this concept of becoming animal and posthuman affect.
All right, and one last thing that would be directed to Jason is that, I mean, your presentation was not in English, the game you were demonstrating, so I did not get most of it, but it seemed very fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
There were certainly animals in Jason's game too. We have 1 minute, and I would like to use this 1 minute to ask a question from Yiou and Yujie. You mentioned the sort of cultural history of maize briefly in the beginning of your presentation, and then I saw your game and I was thinking to which extent we are talking about the same cultural historical maize, which was not a sort of perfect information game. Maize was viewed from the first-person perspective, from the vagrant perspective, yet your game implements a sort of omnipresent, all-seeing perspective, which gives the player supposedly all the information they need. So I was wondering if you had something to say on this sort of choice of the perspective.
Thank you. This is a great question. We have actually put a lot of thought into the choice of isometry as the view of the projection type of the game, as opposed to a plan view or a first-person camera, because actually, apart from the orthogonal shape of the maze, which is to the historical, our maze uses a different game mechanics, which involves a temporal indeterminacy. And in the traditional experience of gaming a maze, and there are a lot of video games in the traditional first-person camera view. In that kind of experience, people don't have an omniscience of the whole structure at any given moment. So I call it a spatial omniscience. But in our game, the mechanics is actually very chess-like. So the player and the maze are oppositional to each other in a temporal sense. So instead of not giving the player either spatial or temporal omniscience, we chose to give the player spatial omniscience by having the player view the whole structure in isometry. But this is a trade-off. So we give them spatial omniscience, but we take temporal omniscience from them. So there's still so this is related to the concept of game balance and the balancing of agency. So in order for it to be a game, the player has some agency, and also the player doesn't have total agency.
Yes, that answers my question. So it becomes less of a perfect information game by the fact that it changes over time. I have one more clarification about your game. The sort of ways in which what you call the maze agent, the opponent of the player, the ways in which the maze agent makes its moves, changes the labyrinth, it is not affected in real time by the player's movement, right? It's calculated beforehand. Question mark.
It is, our idea is to make the maze to the real-time movement of the player.
So the maze response, like if I get stuck, it might go easy on me. But if I seem to be finding the path very quickly, then it will make it more difficult. So is there this sort of real-time feedback, real-time relation?
The current playtest actually we didn't have like enough size to actually achieve that reasonable difficulty index to perform very well. So right now it's not too efficient to compute in the real time, but that's our goal in the future to develop.
Right. I guess the word I was looking for was dynamic difficulty. It sort of escaped me whether there is dynamic difficulty or not. That answered my question.
We're working on right now.
Good. I look forward to playing your game in the future. I think we're out of time. Thank you, all the panelists, for your presentation. Thank you for the discussion. There is one more question in the audience. Wait for the mic. So they can't hear you if you don't speak to the mic.
It's not really a question. I just wanted if they could show the link to the game once again. That's all. Because they showed the link which I could not write down and copy.
Please feel free to share your screen again. Or is the link in your paper, actually? Because you've got a paper in the proceedings. Is there a link to your game?
Yes, I think we have the link.
Just put it in the chat.
Are you in the chat?
No, I'm not on the meeting. Could you just?
I'll show it to you on this screen.
I'll just click a photo if you could open. Is it possible to open chat?
How do we show the chat on the screen?
Okay, yeah, that'll be good.
You have it. Wait. Okay then, now it is time for coffee break. Go and enjoy a cup of coffee and see you at the next session, which is in about 25 minutes, I believe. Thanks again to everyone and look forward to seeing you in the other sessions for this conference.
Thanks, Olli.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.